If you go to most estheticians or dermatologists and ask them about the sun, more than likely they'll hand you a sunscreen and tell you to stay inside. And I've been in this industry for going on 20 years, and I get why they say that. But today I want to offer a completely different conversation because I actually think the sun is medicine. Our ancestors were healed by the sun, and somewhere along the way we forgot that. And this idea that the sun is some hostile force that should be avoided at all costs disconnects you from the natural rhythms that we thrive under. You are listening to Skin, Earth, Vitality, the podcast where ancient wisdom meets modern vitality. If you are seeking to reconnect with your innate vibrancy, you're in the right place. I'm Emily Davis, a seasoned holistic esthetician and herbalist. Join me as we unlock the secrets of ancient skincare practices, explore the beauty of seasonal and nature-based living, herbalism, and true holistic well-being for you and the broader ecosystem. This podcast is brought to you by Stratum Aesthetics. Head to stratumaesthetics.com to find curated skincare, body care, and other wellness products hand-selected by me. Now enjoy the show. Please remember that the information I share in this podcast is based on my personal and professional experience and is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It is not individualized skincare advice, nor is it medical advice. I encourage you to take charge of your own health decisions and listen to your body, seeking out the resources and professionals that best support your wellness journey. Welcome back in. Today's episode is one of my favorite topics, and it's the final piece in my mini series about summer. Today, we're talking about the sun, and the way that I look at it is most likely different than what you've heard before from beauty professionals. This is a different way of looking at the sun than, 90% of the beauty industry sees it. And of course, if you've been here for long, you know that I always want to take a rounded approach, a nuanced, or dare I say, a holistic approach. And there is that side of the coin where there's this, very fear-based narrative around the sun. And then there's this other extreme that you may or may not have seen online with like the natural community or the quote unquote holistic community who make it sound like if you wear sunblock, you're not crunchy enough, you're not holistic enough. And basically you can go in the sun all day, every day, and the sun doesn't cause damage. And I don't agree with this take either. So I want to break down my thoughts on this, but really what I want to talk about today is why the sun is so special, so medicinal, and why we should work with it intelligently. And if you like the lens I look at skin through, you will love my weekly newsletter. It's called Moon Day Notes. It's a love letter in your inbox every Monday with tips and tricks and ideas about skincare and herbalism, wellness, true holistic wellness. You can sign up for that in the link in my show notes. So with that said, let's get into the episode. I've watched the industry that I'm in, the beauty industry, and their fear narrative of the sun play out with clients and students for almost 20 years. And the bubble I'm in right now, I don't see it as much. I see that opposite extreme much more, but I know that it's still out there. And I get so frustrated with this narrative because it frames nature as a threat instead of something that we should be in relationship with. And throughout most of history, cultures have looked at the sun and known that it is sacred. It's the primary source of energy for almost every living system on our planet. Think about it. Every carrot, every oak tree, every blade of grass, every cow, every human, all of that is here because of sunlight. And I want to tap into an Ayurvedic lens really quickly, and we're going to return to this later in the episode. But when we look at the sun from this point of view, the sun is the greatest expression of cosmic transformation. And what I mean by that is in Ayurveda, the sun is the origin of what's called Agni. And this is the transformative fire principle that governs our digestion and our metabolism, but also our perception and intelligence at every level of all things. So the sun doesn't just warm the planet, the sun animates the planet. And I'm bored and sick of people who are trying to make money off of reducing something so awe-inspiring into a risk management problem. When we do this, we're cultivating a mindset of fragility. And I would argue, I'm going to digress for just a minute. I would argue that this mindset of fragility is such a vibe right now, especially if you're chronically online. You start to think that the planet is fragile, that you're fragile. There's just so much fragility happening. And this messaging has turned protection into such a high cultural value. And it creates this chronic anxiety about the fragile state of everything. And this is so disempowering, right? It is not of God. And it's interesting to ponder about why there's such a prevalent message of learned helplessness. When you start to notice it, you start to see it very often in the online world. And I think it's because it can be profitable. And I'd say it's worth asking, like, who's getting more powerful when these thoughts become ingrained? And I don't know the answer, but I just think it's very interesting, and it's been going on for a very long time. And I promise this isn't a conspiracy podcast. I just think that this should be addressed. This idea that we are so fragile, even though we've evolved with the sun. And I don't want this episode to be anti-sunblock. I carry sunblock in my shop. I wear sunblock when I know I need it. We're going to talk about that near the end of the episode. I think it's a great tool. But today I want to talk about why we should be in relationship with the sun rather than just focusing on blocking it out all of the time. Because a little over a century ago, medicine was actively using the sun therapeutically. There was a scientist named Niels Finsen who was known as the founder of modern phototherapy. And he was born in I think I'm pronouncing this right, the Faroe Islands. And these are islands in the North Atlantic Ocean, kind of by Iceland and Norway. And so they're quite north. And so as you can imagine, there are months of darkness. And in his 20s, he was diagnosed with a debilitating and progressive illness. And he was confined to a wheelchair and was suffering from chronic fatigue. And as he's enduring this illness, he notices that his symptoms are improving significantly when he spends time in the sun. And so this inspired him to investigate how different wavelengths of light affect living organisms. And he made so many contributions to the scientific community, including a discovery that filtered red light is beneficial in helping smallpox patients to heal more quickly. He also built a lamplight that was concentrating light through quartz lenses and used it to treat lupus vulgaris, which was tuberculosis of the skin. And this disease was gnarly. You can look up pictures online to see how it was destroying people's faces, basically like eating up their nose and their lips and their cheeks, making them totally deformed. And nothing in medicine had been working and his lamp was showing that light was healing this. And because of this, he won the Nobel Prize in 1903. There was a Swiss physician who was inspired by Finsen named Auguste Rollier. Again, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. If not, it's okay. So he started championing heliotherapy, and he opened up places where people could go called solaria in the Swiss Alps because it was so high in elevation. And of course, higher in elevation means there's going to be greater UV exposure. And so the solarium was an open air patio where people could lay in the sun, and they were finding results with healing tuberculosis again. And so this became popular with doctors across Europe, and even the German military was using this for soldiers during World War I. And it was pretty cool. He had 36 clinics with over 1,000 beds, and he did this for 40 years. And so he saw a vast amount of people, and there's photographic evidence from both of these men's work that's absolutely breathtaking. You can look it up online and just see how incredibly healing their work was. This time of using specific light as medicine in Western culture was not long-lived. Penicillin arrived in the late 1920s, and then streptomycin for tuberculosis specifically came around in 1943. And these were faster for working with tuberculosis than heliotherapy was. That would take months and months, and there was such an epidemic of tuberculosis. And the other reason is because you can't patent sunlight. You can patent a drug. And so pharmaceutical companies were funding research. They were endowing medical schools, and they were responsible for shaping what was being studied at the time. And light therapy didn't have a commercial sponsor. At the same time, early in the 1900s, the Flexner report, which I have discussed before in my episode on flower essences, that was episode 54. I'll link it in the show notes. If you like this episode, you'll like the flower essences episode as well. But the Flexner report was a Carnegie-funded review of American medical education at the time. And it essentially standardized medicine around a pharmaceutical laboratory-based model. And so medical schools that didn't comply with this review lost funding, they lost accreditation. So we've got naturopathic schools, herbal schools, light-based approaches are getting systematically defunded and delegitimized. And that's not because they were disproven. It's just because it wasn't fitting in with this specific model for funding. And so Rollier had this famous quote that was, "Sunlight is like good champagne. It invigorates and stimulates, but in excess, it intoxicates and poisons." And that's exactly what I want to talk about today. And I think that that's the most grounded take on the sun that I've heard. So let's talk about what the body actually does with the sun. It's easy to think that you're just getting one input, like higher vitamin D. But the sun is creating this very elegant cascade of signals throughout all of these different pathways simultaneously. And it's important to understand that sunlight is a full spectrum of light. So we have ultraviolet light. You cannot see UV rays. And then we have visible light. And then we have infrared. Also, you cannot see infrared. And different light wavelengths that are coming from the sun are stronger at different times of the day and during different seasons. And it's so fascinating because our biology is playing off of this. So we've got different signals, different responses, depending on what the sun is delivering in that moment. And to receive the full spectrum signal, the sun needs to land on bare skin and come into your eyes without the barrier of sunglasses, because your skin and your eyes are light sensing organs. They have photoreceptors that are reading the light from the environment and then sending different signals throughout your body. So your skin and your eyes are kind of like an antenna for the sun. One of the cool things that the sun is doing is triggering the release of nitric oxide from your skin into your bloodstream. A dermatologist at the University of Edinburgh named Richard Weller discovered this, and it super surprised the medical community at the time. Nitric oxide is a vasodilator, so it's going to relax your blood vessels. It lowers blood pressure, it improves circulation, it supports cardiovascular health. And in 1998, there were 3 American pharmacologists who actually received the Nobel Prize for their discoveries showing that nitric oxide acts as a signaling molecule in the cardiovascular system. The Nobel Prize Committee called nitric oxide, quote, the most important molecule in the body. So people with low levels of nitric oxide are at greater risk for high blood pressure, coronary artery disease, impaired vision, depression, cognitive decline. It's also really important for the skin because it's a big part of wound healing, for cell proliferation, so new cells coming up to the surface, and also for collagen formation. And UVA light is the primary and best established trigger, but also blue light and near infrared light do release nitric oxide. So we really want that full spectrum of light. I say that because we don't want to just go to a tanning bed and get filtered UV rays. We want that full spectrum of sun. And like I said, we're not receiving the full spectrum at all times of the day because the atmosphere is filtering them. And early in the morning, we're getting the longer rays, so the infrared. And then we have UVA rise around 7-ish. It's going to change throughout the year. And then we have UVB rise, which happens at about 10. And then UVB goes down faster, and then UVA, and then in the evening again we have more infrared. And so all of this to say we want sun exposure to those receptors in our skin and our eyes multiple times a day. So moving on from nitric oxide, just understanding that that's a big deal, let's talk about what the sun is doing to your brain and your mood, because I think this is the part we can most immediately feel. Think about that first warm, sunny day of the year when you're outside and you're now talking to strangers randomly and everything just feels possible. And maybe you don't even know why, but the reason is it's neurochemistry responding to sunlight. When light interacts with those receptors that we've been talking about, it starts producing serotonin, which is your feel-good, calm and present neurotransmitter. And on a bright sunny day, your brain is producing way more serotonin than on a dark cloudy day. And so this is why January feels like January. And sunlight also triggers the release of dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter of motivation and pleasure and focus, kind of just feeling alive and wanting to engage with the world. And then we also have what's called BDNF. This is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And this is like fertilizer for your brain. It promotes growth of new neurons. It protects existing nerve cells. It's deeply connected to mood, resilience, learning new things. And BDNF levels rise in spring and summer with increased light exposure, and then they drop in fall and winter. And that's not a bad thing. That's not to say fall and winter are bad, but it's just to say the sun is literally helping you build and protect your brain. And I also want to talk about melatonin because a lot of people think of that as a sleep supplement that you take for insomnia. But melatonin, your body naturally makes melatonin. It's one of the most important antioxidants. It's actually the most important antioxidant for cleaning up after sun damage. But the melatonin that your body makes at night to carry you into sleep is built from the serotonin that your body made during the day in the sunlight. And this means your sleep tonight is being set by your light exposure in the morning. We can't forget about vitamin D. We usually think about this as bone support, maybe immune health, and vitamin D is good for that, but it's also so much more. We have vitamin D receptors found in almost every tissue of our body. It's in our skin, our brain, your heart, in your immune cells, it's in your gut, and it's regulating somewhere between 800 and 900 genes. So all of this to say it's a master regulatory hormone. It's a big deal. And there's so much research out there that talks about vitamin D and its importance for cancer prevention, cardiovascular health, respiratory health, diabetes, muscle function, pregnancy outcomes, your gut microbiome integrity, autoimmune disease regulation, brain health, and then also, of course, skin. The form of vitamin D that's synthesized in our skin is going to impact the development of keratinocytes, which are our skin cells, as well as the integrity of your skin barrier, wound healing. So wound healing, whenever I say that, that's like every skin issue, including aging, acne. We need appropriate wound healing for breakouts to heal. Hyperpigmentation and dark spots, we need proper wound healing to avoid those. So vitamin D is a big deal. And when UVB hits your skin, it starts converting a compound called 7-dehydrocholesterol into pre-vitamin D3, which is then going to travel to your liver and kidneys to become the active hormone that your body uses. So the sun is triggering the creation of vitamin D, but it also creates an entire family of biologically active compounds in your skin alongside it. So it's very important to understand that. Some of these regulate immune function. Some of these compounds are involved in inflammation and DNA repair. We're really only beginning to understand all of these interesting compounds that are also created with vitamin D in the skin, and none of these exist in a vitamin D supplement. And we know that this matters because there was a landmark trial called the VITAL trial. This is one of the largest and most expensive nutrition trials that was ever conducted. There were over 25,000 people over 5 years taking vitamin D supplements daily. And this trial showed that there was no significant reduction in cancer, cardiovascular disease, or overall mortality. So, a supplement of vitamin D is not the sun. Big surprise. It's just one molecule in this cascade that the sun is creating. We haven't fully mapped out all of the other compounds. And I just think it's really amazing to humble ourselves and realize how little modern science currently knows. And so with that being said, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about how ancient systems view the sun. And before I do that, I want to say something that is on my mind because you hear in a lot of wellness spaces this idea of ancient wisdom is now being backed by science. And I get why people say that. I understand the impulse. I'm sure I've said it many times, but I feel like that framing is saying that these thousands-year-old systems of careful observation and accumulated wisdom now need Western science to come along and give it a hall pass. Like it wasn't legitimate until a randomized control trial said so. And I don't think that's true. I don't think it's very humble. And I really don't think it's that great of science to think that way either, because it's creating this assumption that what we can currently measure is the full boundary of what's real. So there's a little food for thought on that. But people have been observing the sun as sacred, as I said, as a sacred source for thousands of years. In Ayurveda, the sun is understood as the animating intelligence behind life. And within the body, the solar principle lives as a term called tejas. Tejas is a subtle essence of fire and light. So it's what gives skin its luminosity and its glow, or eyes their clarity. When somebody's eyes have like a very clear sparkle to them, it's what gives our minds discernment and sharpness. Think of someone you know who's just glowing. Maybe they have this quality of aliveness and radiance that you just feel when you're around them. You feel very magnetized to them because of that. And Ayurveda has a word for that, which is tejas. And it's understood as something that's cultivated through how you live, with your relationship to light and with food and rest even, and the rhythms of nature. And you can't really just supplement your way or skincare products your way to tejas. There's not a product for that. And I sometimes look at all these biohackers who are doing all the supplements and I'm like, OMG, they do not look healthy. And that's because of tejas. It's something you cultivate with relationship, like relationship to the sun or to your body's own intelligence, to the intelligence of nature. And Ayurveda has distinguished between the quality of morning light and midday light for a very long time. It's understood that the body is most receptive to solar energy at specific times. Dinacharya is Ayurveda's daily routine framework. It's like your daily habits. And it's essentially a circadian protocol that came before the word circadian by several thousand years, which is wake up before sunrise, oil your body, go outside, eat with the light, which means you're eating maybe a smaller meal in the morning. And then at midday is when you enjoy your biggest meal because your digestion is following the sun. And then early in the evening before dark, you're going to eat another small meal. And this entire system is organized around aligning your biological rhythms with the solar cycle. And what I find beautiful about this, what draws me to Ayurveda as a framework, is that it starts from a completely different premise than modern medicine. It's the belief that the body is not fragile, it's not passive, it's not a system that's just waiting to break down, but instead it's this intelligent, responsive system that's in constant conversation with its environment and its ability to heal. You know, we didn't evolve despite the sun, we evolved with it. So with that being said, where we are right now in this time in history, I think it's really important that we know how medicinal and healing the sun is. And we also understand that the sun can cause damage. And a lot of that has to do with our circadian health. So meaning how well we are adapting to the light during different times of day. Modern culture and like normal ways of living make it very difficult to have good circadian health. Think, a lot of people are sitting in an office all day long under fluorescent lights and they're not getting sunlight during the day. And then they come home and they're in front of a TV screen, a phone, a computer, getting blue light, which is what's emitted during the middle of the day at nighttime. And so it's totally messing up all of the signals. I have an episode about circadian health, which I will put in the show notes, episode 73. So you can go back and check that out. And so ideally, we're not getting a lot of damage from the sun because those signals from different light frequencies throughout the day are offsetting the damage or creating a cascade effect that offsets the damage. But oftentimes that's not the case. And so it's not wise to just go out in the sun and burn, obviously. So I'm going to tell you how I relate to the sun. I myself don't wear sunblock every day. And I know that that's like total hearsay as an esthetician, but there's a lot of context here. So I work inside most of the day giving facials in a treatment room. I am not out in the sun all day, every day. And my relationship with the sun looks like before anything else in the morning, at sunrise, I sit in front of an open window with a cup of tea and I let some morning light in. The window's open because the glass is going to filter that full spectrum of light that I want to get. So I do that. And then a little bit later, I take a walk around UVA rise. Throughout the day, I try to get outside every couple of hours for a few minutes to receive the sun's signals, and I try to watch the sunset whenever I can. And I do try to keep my nights dark. Am I perfect at all of this? No. As we speak, it's 9 p.m. at night. I'm sitting in front of my computer recording this. Modern life does make living a really healthy circadian lifestyle difficult. It's not impossible, but it is difficult. I do recognize, because of industrialized food, disrupted sleep, artificial light at night, a lot of us are not walking around with robust circadian health that makes the body maximally resilient to sun exposure. That is very real. And that's why I get a little frustrated with information on the internet that's like telling you don't have to worry about sunblock and it's all good without any context and without additional education. I do wear sunblock when the situation calls for it. If I'm going to be at a farmer's market at noon in June and I'm going to be outside for several hours, I'm reaching for my SPF because I'm also understanding dose awareness and I am never trying to burn my skin. And something I also want to be honest about, as someone entering my 40s, I'm noticing changes in my skin, specifically my vascular tissue. I'm getting more redness on my cheeks than I had 10 years ago. And as an esthetician who knows skin really well, I know what I'm looking at and I know that there's some vascular issues happening, which I'm actually going to talk about in an episode coming up soon, what I'm doing for this. And one of those things is understanding that UV exposure over time, especially UVA exposure, which is going to penetrate all layers of the skin, can trigger changes in the vascular tissue that causes those vessels to permanently dilate and become visible. And fair skin is more susceptible because we have less melanin to absorb that UV before it reaches our deeper layers. After 40, vessel walls naturally begin to weaken anyways, and so it makes you more prone to this. So I'm paying attention to that. I'm being more intentional about protection during peak hours. I'm working on my vascular health from the inside out. And I'm not panicking about it, but I'm listening to what my skin is telling me. And that's kind of the point of this episode, is having an intelligent relationship with the sun and not listening to dogma and receiving sun wisely rather than totally avoiding it or being reckless about it. And I started this episode talking about fragility and how there's this story that the world is dangerous. And one of the most fundamental forces that has animated life on this earth since the beginning is something to be afraid of and protected from. And I don't think that's true. I don't think that mindset serves us. What I do think is true is that you're not a fragile thing moving through a dangerous world. You're an intelligent, responsive, self-healing system that's in constant conversation with your environment. So my invitation to you coming out of this episode is to go outside tomorrow morning before you put your sunglasses on, before you put your SPF on. Let the light land on your skin. Sit with your tea or your coffee and just start paying attention to your own body's signals rather than someone else's narrative. This is what temple medicine looks like in action. I will be back soon, and until then, be well. You've been listening to Skin, Earth, Vitality. If you like what you heard today, consider giving me a 5-star rating. It helps other people just like you to find the show. You can shop products and find all of my offerings on my website, stratumaesthetics.com, and follow me on my social channels at Stratum Aesthetics.